filters dead? That's what we keep hearing. But saying that filters are no longer necessary for landscape photography is just not correct, and it's also misleading. Spoiler, the fact is, filters are an extra cost and they require far more effort. Indeed, there's no shortage of videos out there on YouTube telling us that filters are no longer needed. Everything can be done in post-processing. But is that true?
Yes, stop using filters now.
Give me a few minutes and I'll explain why filters are still needed for landscape photography, and more importantly, what you could be missing out on by not using them. Let's get to it. Some effects can be done in post-processing while others simply can't. Truly, many effects can be done better in the field than post-processing. But before we get into that, I need to briefly mention how our old friend, confirmation bias, can sneak in and rob us of the truth. Indeed, it's easy for YouTubers like myself to make videos that support their preconceived ideas. That said, it's important to note, I am a filter user. In fact, I enjoy using filters in the field very much. However, there are many reasons to give them up. With this in mind, my goal is to provide you with information, unbiased information, so that you can make the best choice for yourself and your photography. Now that we've gotten the confirmation bias disclaimer out of the way, what filter effects can be done in post-processing? The short answer, everything except a circular polarizer. But there's far more to it than meets the eye. Indeed, there's a cost that many tend to ignore. Let's take the easy one first, the graduated neutral density filter, or Grad as it's commonly called. Many suggest that this filter is obsolete, mainly because the linear gradient in Lightroom and Photoshop seem to do the same thing as good or better. There's no doubt about it, it's an excellent tool and it yields fantastic results. I frequently use it. The linear gradient is also a great tool for many situations, but the one thing it can't do is recover blown out highlights. This is where the graduated neutral density filter truly shines. Indeed, whether you're a film photographer, digital, or both, once the highlights are blown out, there's no recovery. And the linear gradient can't save you. You'll likely be photoshopping in a new sky. Of course, Lightroom and Photoshop are not without a few workarounds. Indeed, there's a few highlight recovering options available, but each have their issues. For example, bracketing images is fantastic as long as there's no movement in the scene. A moving object requires a lot of touch-up in post. Blurred leaves, even moving water can be hard to fix and require extra work and extra skill in Photoshop. A less complicated option involves using the camera's histogram to expose to the right. This is commonly called ETTR. Depending on the scene's dynamic range, you may end up exceeding your camera's capabilities. Photoshop has a few other tools, such as luminosity masking. Still, if the information in the highlights is gone, there's nothing left to work with. Check out my video on exposure blending options for high dynamic range landscape photography. Also, there's a ton of videos on YouTube that cover these techniques in great detail. Look, luminosity masks, bracketing, and filters in post they're just great tools. In fact, I use these tools myself all the time, but a graduated neutral density filter provides me with additional options that allow me to retain the maximum detail possible in the highlights. And saying that this filter is obsolete is just incorrect. Each of these tools have flaws, including my cherished Grad. For example, in a high dynamic range situation, I always turn to my trusty Grad first. But if trees or other objects are crossing the horizon into the sky, these objects are obviously going to be darkened by the filter, and the effects of the Grad are baked into the image. And it's quite a chore to get it out in post. At any rate, whether you're in the field or post-processing, a good photographer uses all tools to make their vision become a reality. So, what about other types of filters, such as creating long exposures with a 10-stop ND filter? Yes, these effects can be replicated in post by stacking images taken at different intervals. But just like bracketing, moving objects present the same challenges. And with ND filters, moving objects like leaves tend to have more of a natural blur compared to the results that you get from stacking several images. In my experience, stacking can cause strange, unnatural artifacts that are just difficult or even impossible to remove, at least to my satisfaction, which is the deal breaker for my photography. That brings us to the circular polarizer. At the moment, the effects of a circular polarizer just can't be reproduced in Photoshop. In a forest setting, a circular polarizer can perform miracles. Removing the glare from wet leaves and rocky surfaces can transform the typical mundane scene into something magical. Instead of saying that filters are dead, maybe we should be saying that filters have their uses. Ponder this, a game-changing camera could be developed right now at this moment. One capable of capturing every detail in both the shadows and the highlights. But why stop there? Why not just throw in a built-in circular polarizer while we're at it? If this camera did exist, then yes, ND filters would be dead. One day, I think this technology will come to pass, certainly within the next couple decades, and then we might be watching my video and it might be titled, "Filters Really Are Dead." Imagine that. Let's briefly talk about color filters. Are they dead too? Well, not necessarily, especially if you're a film photographer. However, one could argue that color filters are dead. Many of these effects can be reproduced in post-processing. But like I mentioned earlier, there's a cost. With film, or at least for me, the goal is to capture, let's just say, a perfect negative, or at least as perfect as possible. A good negative makes a good print or a good scan. The more detail in the negative, the more options one has. When sending your film out to the lab for scans, you'll likely get back a JPEG image. Most of us are not going to excessively edit a JPEG because, well, it's not a RAW file. On the other hand, when scanning at home, I have a lot of latitude with processing a negative. The available detail in the negative is what determines the quality of the image, whether that's printing or posting on social media for that matter. To keep this simple, let me say it like this. Using color filters in the field allows me to get it right in camera and create the best negative possible. It also allows me to eliminate the need for heavy edits in post-processing, especially when editing a JPEG image. Remember, we're talking about film scans, not RAW files from a DSLR. That's why I use a number 12 filter for black and white photography. For sunrise and sunset photography, it darkens the blues in the sky and provides more contrast in the clouds. Doing it in camera allows me to capture all the detail on the negative rather than having to heavily edit the JPEG in post. As with many hobbies and professions, especially when it comes to art, no two people ever do things the same way. It doesn't always have to be black and white, no pun intended. Indeed, there's no one way to do everything, and not everyone has to be right or wrong, left or right. There is a center or a middle ground. However, there do appear to be a couple of different schools of thought here when it comes to filters. Some prefer the ease and simplicity of applying the filters in post-processing, while others prefer doing it in camera while in the field. Let's not forget about the middle ground, and I think that's where I'm at. I prefer to use all filters in post and in the field. It's not that I don't want to take a side. Honestly, I think we're doing too much of that in the world these days, but I digress. I want to use the tools that are available to get the best results, and I don't need anyone telling me with absolutism what's right or wrong. Personally, I do very little post-processing. Heavy edits are just something I avoid when possible, but when necessary, I'm able and I'm ready. Lightroom and Photoshop are great tools, and they're to be used and not avoided or feared. I don't want to avoid something just because I can't do it or I don't understand it, or I just don't have the time to learn it. And don't get me wrong, it's okay to safeguard one's time. We can't make the time for everything, but we don't have to fall victim to confirmation bias, especially because we don't want to take the time to invest in something new. Look, let's face it, people do it all the time. It's easier to discount one's ideas when they challenge our own. We tell ourselves that filters are dead, so we don't have to buy something new, so we can get that new camera, right? Why suffer a learning curve or spend extra time and money fiddling with filters in the field? It takes too long. They're too bulky. They're obsolete. They look ugly on my camera. Blah, 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 blah. So we just say that, well, everything can be done in post-processing and filters are dead. And anyone that disagrees is just plain crazy. Here's the thing about confirmation bias. If we don't make things right in our mind, we feel like we're missing out on something. And for some people, that just ain't gonna happen. That's confirmation bias. I say embrace the suck. Learn what's needed to get the perfect negative or the perfect RAW file so we can get the best product in the end. The art of photography is something that should be practiced and enjoyed. If photography is your profession, I hope you enjoy it. But if not, you may be looking for the simplest solution, and there's nothing wrong with that. But we have to ask if we're being honest with ourselves. I enjoy the process, and filters are part of it, both in the field and back in the office. Let me share what filters I use and why. I use the Lee SW150 filter system on all my cameras. This system was specifically designed for wide-angle lenses, but rather than having several different filter kits, I have one. The obvious advantage is having only one filter kit as opposed to several. However, the major disadvantage is that this thing is huge. It takes up a lot of space, and the filters are massive. The graduated filters are 150 by 170 millimeters. The circular polarizer and other ND filters are 150 by 150. Honestly, if money were no object, I might have 2 or 3 different sets, especially the newer magnetic ones. But I decided to invest in one good set that I can use with all my lenses, which brings me to the heart of the system's flexibility, and that's adapters. Now, we can get into the color cast and the difference in quality between Lee and other brands, maybe in another video for another day, but not today. At any rate, I want to make this simple point here. Whatever filter system one selects, the easier it is to use, the more likely it will be used. I chose this filter system, well, for one lens, the Nikon 14 to 24 millimeter. Now I could have gone with the 16 to 35 instead. It takes a 77 millimeter filter, but then again, I would have still ended up needing the larger filter system because I bought the Pentax 6.7 with the 55 to 100 f4.5, and this thing takes a massive 95 millimeter filter to make this system work. However, at the time I didn't have the Pentax 6.7, but I did want that extra 2 millimeters on the focal length on the 14 to 24. Now don't get me started on ultra-wide-angle lenses, but if you don't know, the difference between 14 and 16 millimeters is pretty significant. Many images I've made over the years were captured at 14 millimeters, and many of them could have been even wider. If you're interested in wide and ultra-wide-angle lenses, you may want to check out my video, Do You Need an Ultra-Wide-Angle Lens for Landscape Photography? In this video, I cover the differences between wide and ultra-wide and many of the uses. Anyway, you may want to check it out. With the help of these adapters, the SW150 filter system affords me the flexibility of using one kit for every lens in my bag. Plus, over the years, I've gotten quite familiar with this filter kit, and it works fine for my type of photography. Yes, it's pretty bulky, but it's worth it for me anyway. Let's talk specifically about the filters. I'll start with the ones I hardly ever use anymore. Ironically, I used to use these all the time, but not so much these days. It's Lee's Little Stopper and Big Stopper. These are 6 and 10 stop filters. And don't get me wrong, I certainly carry these with me all the time because when you need one, it delivers amazing results. I mainly use these for either completely smoothing out the water and providing a fine art look, or I use it to slow motion in a waterfall or movement in streaking clouds. On the other hand, I have a 3-stop ND filter, which sees a fair amount of action. In fact, I get the most use from the 3-stop, followed by the 6-stop, and lastly the 10-stop. Honestly, I think most photographers could probably get away with just one, maybe the 6-stop. They're nice to have when the time comes. On the other end of the spectrum, the one I use the most often, the circular polarizer, and that's probably true for most photographers. For one, its effects can't be reproduced in post-processing. A circular polarizer is just unbeatable for removing glare from leaves and water. As a landscape photographer who primarily shoots at sunrise and sunset, second to the circular polarizer is the graduated ND filter. I only use two, a 3-stop soft grad and a 3-stop reverse grad. In fact, I often use these filters even when there are trees or other objects that are protruding into the sky. And I know, everybody says you can't do that, but you can. The transition is often subtle. It's hardly noticeable, if it's noticeable at all. Some of the effects can be toned down a little bit in post-processing if necessary. This filter is especially useful for film, when you don't want to over-process the image. When shooting film, I use all my filters. Plus, I also use a yellow number 12 filter. As I mentioned, this helps increase the contrast and provides tonal separations for black and white photography. Indeed, filters are part of my workflow. I've used them for years and I'll likely continue until something better comes along. Leave a comment and let me know what you think about my thoughts on filters. Did I nail it? Or do you think I've just missed the mark on this one? All opinions are welcome, but let's play nice with others. Don't forget to check out the videos I mentioned, and I hope you enjoyed this video. And if you did, hit that like button and consider subscribing. And I hope to see you on the trail.